Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Help us. Our name is NCS. We are in the castle dungeon. And it's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. How's it going, Mark?
It's going great. I'm so happy to be here. Patrick, I have to tell you that,
Yes.
now that we've kind of a little bit, at least for now, more formally moved to a twice-a-week recording schedule, I'm loving it.
Yes.
I'm loving the opportunity to speak with you two times a week rather than when we were trying to record on one times a week, which was great as well. But this is just like, it's just kind of, it works out perfectly this way, for me at least.
Yeah, well, when there's a commute involved, when you have to come to my place, it just makes sense for us to knock out both episodes in one night. It means we have like sort of a late night on Monday, but like now, when we're both recording in the comfort/discomfort of our own homes, it makes it. I feel like I can be a little bit more specifically prepared for each episode. Does that make sense?
I completely agree, and I hope that translates into these episodes, and that our listeners aren't like, "What are they talking about?" Everything's just become more vague.
Yeah, if it sounds, look, we think we're being more specific and clearer and giving you, I don't know, a better show, but at least an as good show.
As long as we're still using clear subjects in our sentences, then
Yes.
I think that is a win.
Subjects, objects, gerunds, we got it all. Speaking of having it all, would you like to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces? Too bad you can't for a while. But if you would like to get on the list to someday eventually borrow my copy of Sonic Forces on the Nintendo Switch, all you got to do is email us at nintendocartridgesociety@gmail.com. And give us a mailing address where I can send my copy of Sonic Forces to you when I am not too frightened to go into the post office. Currently, I am too frightened to do that, so you'll just have to wait. Mark, I'll be honest, I've been thinking about playing Sonic Forces.
Oh my gosh, things have gotten that bad?
No, it's just like it's there. Like I see it sitting on my shelf. I'm like, that's a game that's in my apartment, and you're saying no.
No, I'm saying that this is the temptation that the Sonic Forces borrowing program was created to, like, I don't know what I'm saying. Basically,
No, you're right. I'm an addict. I need to be stopped.
You need to be freed of Sonic Forces, and the only way to do that is to lend it to other people. And yet another casualty of COVID-19 is that it is sitting in your house, and it's like the One Ring from Lord of the Rings. Like, the longer it's there, the more it is turning you.
It taunts me, my precious. The thing is, look, if someone needs to use this as motivation to develop some sort of vaccine, like, do it. I give you my blessing. Mark, we're doing fun stuff in April because, look, we had it on the books already, so we're going to keep doing it. We are doing a cool retro month of SNES classics. Obviously, today we are discussing The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Next week, we are talking about Super Metroid, one of the greatest Metroid games ever. So if you would like to get in the conversation and talk to us about Super Metroid, shoot us an email, play along with us. You can play it on the SNES Switch Online or the Super NES Classic Edition. It's also available on the 3DS and Wii U eShops. So check that out. Email us, tweet at us, and participate in the conversation. And then the week after, we're doing Yoshi's Island. And the week after that, we're doing Star Fox.
Is there one of these that you're looking forward to the most?
I mean, I think my favorite of all of them is the one that we are discussing today. Um, but I also like Super Metroid is a game that is in my veins. That like I close my eyes and I see Super Metroid. Except for Meridia, that's the one part of that game that I do not have memorized. What about you, Mark? What is there one that you're looking forward to most?
I can tell you the one I'm dreading the most, and that is Star Fox. But maybe it'll be like a pleasant surprise. Maybe I'll end up being like a Star Fox head. Maybe that's all I'll ever talk about ever again.
That's true, like me with Star Tropics.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all well and good. Everyone understands what we're doing for the rest of the month. Mark, are you ready to get into it? Are you ready to discuss The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Mark, where to begin with this game? I think a good place to begin is with an email that we got from listener Martin. We read this email maybe a couple weeks ago, but I just wanted to like re-underline the point that he makes here. Martin wrote, "One thing I would love for you to discuss is how well these games would suit someone who has no nostalgia for them and who has become used to games with 21st century quality of life improvements. I know that will be tough as your playthroughs are bundled with tons of emotions, but I trust you two to try to step back and give an objective opinion."
So I know that this is going to be a little bit hard for Link to the Past because this is a game that I think we both feel very deeply. I think some of the later games that we're going to be playing this month, like I have less just like memories of playing, and
Hmm.
so it will be easier for me. But I did keep this in mind in my playthrough for our discussion today of A Link to the Past.
Yeah, as did I. So, Martin, we are trying. But like with that sort of spirit in mind, we can maybe just talk a little bit about the state of Nintendo and the state of The Legend of Zelda as a series when this game came out.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um, yeah.
what's kind of like interesting about A Link to the Past is, right, it was only the third Zelda game at this point. And so now like the Zelda
Yes.
formula that we take kind of like for granted, or at least took for granted before Breath of the Wild, didn't really exist. You had the original Legend of Zelda, you had the second game, which is like a huge departure, and then you
Hmm.
have Link to the Past, which is kind of like a I don't like basically a remake of the first game in the same way that Ocarina of Time would be a remake of Link to the Past, and like so on and so forth.
Yeah. And it's interesting like how it like it feels like it's part return to form, but also part like its own thing. Like this is borderline where Zelda gets its identity, right? Like the idea of collecting one set of items to like trigger the second half of the game um is established here and then sort of revisited in all other Zelda games, right? Like Ocarina has it, Twilight Princess has it, Wind Waker has it. It's just like how these games are structured from here on out. Um and like the um Link's Awakening was originally meant to be a remake of this game on Game Boy, right? And slowly turned into something else, and it became its own animal. But like all of that is, it just means that there's so much of the series that's built on the blocks that Link to the Past laid down.
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, this was like my Zelda in a way.
Yeah.
Was A Link to the
Hmm.
Past way more than the NES game, either of the NES games ever were. This was the one that like meant the most to me, and in some ways, like still does mean the most to me. Did you play this on like Super Nintendo? Is that where you like put the most of your time into it?
Originally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I played this game when it came out on Super Nintendo. So it came out in like May of 1992. Um, and I definitely played it on Super Nintendo when it came out. I'm guessing you got to it later, right?
Yeah, so like we had a Super Nintendo, but again, we came to it late. I want to say it was maybe like 93 or 94 before we got one. And I didn't like we did not own A Link to the Past. I would go to like friend's house or my cousin's house and like see them playing it, and I would play some of it. But it wasn't until the Game Boy Advance version that I like really
Mm.
sunk a ton of like time just myself into like exploring A Link to the Past.
Yeah. Geez, I'm trying to remember what year this would have been, but like, um, so the game came out in '92, and I probably played it somewhere right around then. In '92, I would have been 10 years old, right? Um, and we used to go over to, as like I'm sure everyone does, have like family friends where like they have kids that are your age, so like you know them, but like are you friends? No, you hang out when your parents are hanging out. um but I remember going over to the Willems house, and Cleet Willems, who works for the White House now, I'm sorry. um he was playing Zelda and was like deep into this game, right? Was like, I think in the no, like the last dungeon in the Dark World. Um and I had played through the game so many times at that point that as like a little 10-year-old, I knew how to get through the part where you have to like walk on the invisible blocks, you
Uh-huh.
know? um and just there was that moment of like I'm 10 or 11 or something, and he's like 14, right? Like we're just far apart enough in age where like he shouldn't want to talk to me about anything.
Uh-huh.
But I could help him through the last dungeon in Link to the Past. And that just being like a part of, I don't know, I just like I felt like a valid human being in this moment where I had something socially to offer him. Um, but yeah, I mean, like that was my experience with this game, was like being so deep in it that like, um, the kids that were older than me like sought me as a resource on playing this game.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Isn't it crazy? Kids are so weird, man. So what did it look like as you were sinking your teeth into the GBA version of this?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I had like a lot of friends at that time who also had GBAs. And so we were kind of like playing this stuff together where, like a GBA wasn't that expensive. I think it was like $100. The games were like $30. And so
Hmm.
it was like at that time it was like super accessible for all of us. And so we would all be like, yeah, let's get like a Link to the Past. We would all play Link to the Past. We played a bunch of Four Swords Adventure, which like first came as part of the Link to the Past GBA release. And so it was just like one of those rare magical like video game intensive times in life where it was like that's pretty much all I really had to worry about. Um
Yeah.
like so I for what I was like my second video game adolescence, and so it came at like the perfect time where I have such like fond memories of like really digging into this game, because one of the things I appreciated so much on this playthrough that, well, okay, I guess it had been a long while, at least 10 years since I had done a complete playthrough of Link to the
Oh,
Past.
really?
Yeah.
I just I want the record to show that when I went in to start my playthrough for this episode, I was playing on my Super NES Classic Edition, because I wanted to play on a Super NES controller. There, what the first save file had 20 hearts and had completed the game. So I have, since the SNES Classic came out, like a year and a half ago, I have all played through the game, and then I have played through it again since
Yeah.
now, obviously.
Like I have started the game a bunch of times
Mm.
over the years, like a playthrough, but I always usually get to like I finish the light world, like I get the 3 pendants, and then then you get to the dark world and you're like, "Oh my gosh, there's like 7 or 8 more dungeons that I have to do."
Yeah.
And even this time, like you and I were talking, I was like, "Well, I just finished the light world. I don't know that I'm going to finish it." But I like pushed through this time and completed the whole game. Obviously that increased my appreciation for it in a way that like there was a lot of stuff that I had forgotten over the years that like continues to open up once you get into the dark world and are going between the dark world and light world, so like back and forth.
Yeah, and the dark world, the right when you get there can be a demoralizing experience, right? Um, and not just for like the story reasons of like you thought you were rescuing the princess and then like you're not. That's something that's easy to overcome, like mentally and emotionally as an adult, where you're like, I know this is what's going to happen in the game. Um, but like you're suddenly put into a version of the map where you can't get around as easily, and where suddenly there are these giant cyclopses throwing bombs at you and dealing way too much damage, and that you can barely hurt. Um, and like the game like ramps up its difficulty, or like kind of ramps up the gatekeeping that it is doing, and just becomes uh like for the first maybe like 3 or 4 dungeons, until you get through the one that's in the like dark Kakariko village,
Uh-huh.
um that it is like a severely limiting thing. Like it is actively pushing you back down after freeing you so much.
It's also like the light world is so welcoming, and like, the
Yes.
music is fun, and you go to like Kakariko Village and it's nice and everybody's around and you're just like, "Oh, I like love this overworld." And then you get transported to the dark world and like the music is mean, everything's brown and
Yes.
ugly. Like so it's just like less of a fun place to hang out in.
Mhm.
And so
I mean,
that
I
makes it
I
hard as
think
well.
yeah, totally. But it is one of the strengths of this game, I think, is that it presents like I think it deals with the like duality of Zelda worlds in a way that's maybe only rivaled by Ocarina of Time. Um that like it's not nearly as good in like Twilight Princess, for example. Um like and it's basically the same as A Link Between Worlds, right? With Hyrule and Low but like the emotional, the feeling of being in the dark world is exactly what the game wants you to feel, right?
Mhm.
You're meant to feel like beaten down, like this is a horrible crushing place that needs to be saved or rectified or destroyed. Like it's not really clear what you're doing.
Yeah, it's like a bleak future, right? Actually, okay. Can we get into the plot of it just a little
Yeah,
bit?
yeah,
Because
lay it on me.
what is actually happening when you go to the dark world? Are you transporting to a different time frame? Is it a different dimension?
So it is when you travel to the dark world, you are going to the what was previously the Golden Realm, right? So it is a version of Hyrule that is affected by the person who wishes on the Triforce. If Link were wishing on the Triforce, it would become a beautiful place filled with all the rocks and pots that you want to throw around, and probably a bunch of rupees. But since Ganondorf wished on it, millennia ago, back in the time frame of video games that have not yet been made in 1992, it is this like horrible dark world, right? So it's like a dark version of paradise, basically.
So both exist in parallel. Like
Yes.
so the light world exists and you obviously because you get the magic mirror and you're like
Right.
transitioning between the two. So it's like a parallel universe that is
Yes.
where like Ganon has his power. So you have to go there in order to destroy Ganon.
Correct.
Gotcha.
But I will admit the game is not super clear on communicating the like larger mythological points of its story.
Which I mean, again, it was 1992. So,
Yes.
it was the era where if you wanted that sort of information, that's what the instruction booklet was for. You could go into the instruction book and get like a deep dive into the plot and everything. And there is definitely a deep dive into the plot. If you look at the instruction booklet for A Link to the Past, we've put a link in the show notes. When the SNES Classic Edition came out, Nintendo put like scans of all of the original instruction booklets up online. So we included that link here. They're really fun to go to check out. The Link to the Past one is like not as fun because it's a little bit like the Silmarillion, where you're like, oh my gosh, this is 4 like dense pages explaining to me what like the history of Hyrule is. But it's fun to check out for the illustrations and everything.
Further to that, if you are interested in even denser, even longer descriptions of story and lore, you should check out the Nintendo Power Player's Guide for the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. It is available. We're also going to put a link in the show notes for this. But like it lays out the events of the 2 previous games as well. And it's man, it is a wild trip to see what game guides used to be, because it's almost like I could flip through this and just sort of read it casually without the game by my side, as though I were reading through like an RPG book. You know what I mean? Where like you just want to like, oh wow, the elves are, oh, they're a little bit smarter than the dwarves, you know, and like just flipping around and like trying to figure out like, oh, does that spell have a connection to like this dungeon over here? They're just so, it's so full of lore and like original art, and not all the art is good. Some of the art is bad. But like it's super interesting to see the lengths that Nintendo and Nintendo Power went through to try and like bring what is a 16-bit presentation, that is, you know, translated from Japanese into these text boxes that are necessarily leaving out crucial information, and like try to present that as like this high epic fantasy story. But as far as what's actually in the game, um like how much do you think the grandiosity of this story is actually communicated in the game?
Um, I actually I feel like they do a surprisingly good job. Like
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning screen, they give you a little bit of information about like the Triforce and the history of the Triforce. When you first go to the Dark World, they do give you like a little bit of history. Each one of the sages tells you like a little bit of information and then is like, "Did you get that? Do you want me to repeat it? Cuz I'll repeat this text box. I'll do it."
I'll do the whole thing again.
So yeah, I do think that like the maybe like the details of what exactly is the Dark World is maybe not super clear, but the emotion of the whole thing I think translates surprisingly well.
So I think the emotion for sure. Um, I don't know if it's just because like I've played this game 30 million times or what, but like every time I get to the sages like telling me about stuff, I am just jamming on that A button and I do not read a word. like, um, and part of that is like you just finished a dungeon, right? And you just like all you want to do at that point is like restock up on fairies or health potions or whatever, and get back out into the world. And the fact that you have to get through these like thick dialogue walls, like I just want to skip past them.
It's surprising to me
um
that that is like one of the things that persists past A Link to the Past. Like Ocarina of Time does almost literally the same exact thing after you defeat every dungeon. It's like, all right, here's this sage, and they're gonna like talk to you for a little bit and explain what you gotta do next.
which is bad there too, but at least like in Ocarina of Time, when you go to like wherever the sages are, that weird little like room where they're all floating on like a giant hexagon, um at least that is doing like sort of cinematic camera angles, and like the camera swoops in and like the music is interesting. um this is literally a black screen with the sage in a like 8 polygon diamond that like rotates around them slowly, and then just text. So like the presentation there, I feel like does leave something to be desired.
Yeah, I think that's
But
fair.
I think that's balanced though, by just like the sort of atmospheric storytelling of everything. Um, this time through, I was particularly struck by everything in the first 10 minutes of the game. So like when the way it like starts, you just like Link wakes up in the middle of the night with this message, this telepathic message from you don't know where, from Princess Zelda. And you go outside and it is raining and storming. There are flashes of lightning. This is the only time you'll see rain in the game. It's the only time it's nighttime. Um, and like all of this stuff that's just happening to like paint a picture, paint a mood to start the game is so interesting and unique. And then like that slowly gets layered on, like you're seeing the castle, your uncle is hurt, and then like you find your way out into the sanctuary, and there are stained glass windows and this like beautiful church music. Like everything is like builds on itself so quickly to create a world that feels so complete by the time you are eventually let out into the open world.
I 100% agree. The opening of A Link to the Past is like one of my favorite game openings ever. I love, like you mentioned it, but I love that like you at the start of the game, your uncle like leaves and then you go and follow him. It's raining, my favorite type of atmosphere in video games. And then when you like for whatever reason, just like the little details of like you are going into the like underneath the castle and your uncle is there and he's like continue on, like here's the sword. Like all of those like little details like really build on each other. This time I was just like really impressed with the small details I had forgotten, like when you go to the throne room and you can like cut the curtains. And so, like, and
Yeah.
there's a functional reason for it later. uh but like just those like little attention to detail that I had forgotten about, that you were like, man, even back in the 90s, Nintendo was like so good at their craft, so good at like those little details that made everything just feel so much more realized.
Yeah, and then like so through the course of like the opening, which as you were saying, like it is so like rich and full of detail, um, but like in maybe like a linear way or something, it's contrasted by the second you get to Kakariko Village and realize that everyone in this town responds to you differently, and like you can the first time you get to Kakariko Village, you can spend half an hour just like checking off. It's not you don't have like a quest log or anything like that. The game isn't so transparent, but just like slowly gathering resources and information and like figuring out that you're pushing blocks around to like get access to rupees. You're buying a bottle from the merchant in the town square, and then you're also seeing things that are going to pay off later, right? You see the running man, the man who like you get close to him and he starts to run away, and you're like, okay, I can't catch him now, but maybe someday I will. You see the blacksmith, right? Like hammering on a sword, and you're like, I can't interact with this now, but someday I will. Um, and like all of it just feels so alive, and you're able to check off all these things. Like, okay, I can check with the sage's name is like Sahar Sharala or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. You go to his house and you find out that like, oh, he's out in the desert. So like that's your next like main thing you got to do. But you're also like, oh, there's a sick kid who gives me a net. Here's a dude who misses his kid. Here's walls that I can bomb. And all of it is just that village does such a good job of being like, no, every inch of this game is something that you need to explore and can be rewarded by.
Yeah, and I had kind of forgotten that. And so that's what I like really loved on this playthrough. I actually found the dungeons to be pretty tedious. I think I'm beginning to like
Hmm.
realize that I don't really like Zelda dungeons that much. I find like I always find it too much. I feel like the shrines in Breath of the Wild are actually the perfect amount of Zelda dungeon for me, where it's like one or two puzzles, get it, get out, and then there's a lot of that instead of just like having to spend a full amount of time, like 45 minutes to an hour, like puzzling out these different dungeons.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of that does feel like, especially in the later dungeons, of just sort of like luck of the draw. Like, did you decide to go to rooms in the right order? Because if you don't, or like you burn a key earlier than you're supposed to, or something, that especially those later dungeons, like in the swamp or like Turtle Rock, or the very last dungeon, if you take a wrong turn in them, they can take forever to
Yeah.
like find your way through them.
I also felt like the dungeons didn't really, for the most part, I didn't feel like they're like once you got into them, there was enough like variation or enough where where the location or they didn't really have enough theming for me. Like I
Yeah.
like some of them do. You have like the Ice Palace, and I feel like Turtle Rock like does a good job as well. But for the most part, I
Mhm.
just thought it like everything just kind of all the dungeons just kind of felt the same. So the real joy to me was exploring Hyrule and finding all of these like things that I had either forgotten about or that I was like, "Oh yeah," like when you swim, when you first get the flippers and you're swimming and you go underneath the bridge and there's the man who's like
Yes.
camping there and like
Yeah.
like stumbling onto that stuff and being like, "Oh my gosh, this is so amazing." Or the pond of luck. Like all like just like those like little things that I appreciated so much in Breath of the Wild, and it was so amazing to me to go back and play Link to the Past and be like, "Wow, these really have their roots here." Like that's really where so much of the stuff we praise about Breath of the
Yeah.
Wild, like so much of it is right here in A Link to the Past.
And it's interesting how Link to the Past, like Breath of the Wild, doesn't really signpost those things. Like it does in that like you'll see an interesting area. Like take the man camping under the bridge. Um you'll see that like one side of the bridge has like rocks on it, so you know you can't like swim in that way, but the other side is open. So like it's the sort of thing where like your brain acknowledges like there's an area there for me to explore, but there's no one telling you. There's no text, and there's no like arrow, and there's no blinking like waypoint marker being like, don't forget to check over here. Um, and I don't know if like it's just my familiarity with the game, or if the game actually just does a good job of kind of funneling you into points of interest in the same way that Breath of the Wild does.
Yeah, I think that it rewards exploration 100%. Like if you aren't just going
Totally.
from like dungeon to dungeon and you want to explore Hyrule, then there's a lot to be found and a lot that is like super rewarding and will help you on your quest. But like it's the Pond of Luck is like oh wait, maybe it's not the Pond of Luck, maybe it's one of there's like a fountain that you find that you toss like your weapon in, and then the
Mhm.
fairy comes, and if you say, "Yeah, I threw that in," she will, like upgrade your sword to the gold sword,
Yeah,
like all that kind of stuff. I think the Fountain of Luck is the one that will increase your capacity for like bombs and arrows and stuff.
I think that's the Pond of Happiness. Yeah,
Okay, there's a Pond of Luck. I think there's a Pond of Happiness. There's lots of ponds of,
right.
but like so like finding those things help, but you don't have to do it. I do think that
Hmm.
like um it is Breath of the Wild did such a good job of being like, yeah, on every literally everywhere you go, if it looks like there's something, there is, and you'll be rewarded for checking it out. I would say Link to the Past is less like that. You could spend a lot of time exploring and not really find anything, but when you do find stuff, it's all
Yeah,
I
that's
always
true.
thought it was like really cool. Like I felt special for finding it.
I think, and this is maybe just Zelda standard too, that this game does a really good job of every power up feels huge. Like when you find the guy that like curses you to have double your magic power, suddenly magic feels like it's usable. You know,
Mhm.
like that you don't have to just be like tending to your magic meter the whole time. Every time you upgrade your sword, you feel like twice as powerful as you were before. Armor upgrades, you feel twice as invulnerable. That like with every, it's so different to the way that like a normal experience points based RPG works, right? Where like you see gradual gains. Every time you get a power up, you feel like a newly powerful Link.
I also felt like, and maybe this is just like recency bias, but I feel like that, like the way that the power ups enable you to explore more of Hyrule is handled really well in A Link to the Past, where it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a natural progression to me, not so much like, obviously it's like an artificial gate that the game has put up, but it feels like
Totally.
natural. Other than maybe the Power Glove, where you're like, come on, let me just like lift these rocks. Um,
Yeah.
but otherwise, you're like, yeah, okay, like it makes sense that I'm not gonna be able to like swim in the deep water until I get this thing. It didn't feel like limiting to me in a way that sometimes my memory of playing like Twilight Princess was like I felt like I was being artificially boxed in, and you can just like really tell.
Yeah. Well, and it also doesn't feel as um like I think this is something that we are going to experience in Super Metroid, where like before you get the any of like the morph ball abilities, or before you get the ability to like even the high jump, like we will feel those, right? Like we will feel Samus's more limited mobility, and I don't think that Zelda makes you feel limited early in the game. It just makes you feel empowered later in the game.
Yeah, I that's such a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think you're completely right.
Okay, so how much like running around and extra stuff did you do in this game? Did you knock out side quests early? Like what was your general approach to getting through this game?
Um, hmm. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't feel like I really spent a significant amount of time pursuing like side quests. Um,
Mhm.
I feel like I like spent most of my time exploring on my way to the next destination.
Which, yeah, I mean, maybe my use of the term side quest isn't really applicable here. Um, but like, I for me, and this felt like a different way for me to play this game. I was trying to do all of the extra stuff as early as possible. So like, I was going to the Pond of Happiness as soon as I got the flippers, so I could start throwing rupees into that thing and max out my bombs and arrows. I got all of the bottles as quickly as I could, and like filled them all up with blue potion. Like I was just for whatever reason this time through, I was like, no, I want to be maxed out. So when I go into the harder dungeons, that I'm just a tank and I can just roll through it. And it was fun, and like maybe I'm in a slightly different place because I know the game so well, that I can, sort of at the drop of a hat, flip the switch in my brain that's like, stop going for the dungeons, go for everything else. But it was neat to kind of approach it in that way, and felt a little bit more like open and malleable than the game normally feels to me.
Well, speaking of having to or trying to be like super leveled up before you like approach some of the dungeons, what did you think of the boss battles this time through?
Uh, it's weird because as soon as I get the cape, I just spam the cape on all of the bosses.
I did not get the cape this go through.
Oh, no cape at all.
Yeah, no cape at all.
Um, so the cape I actually got later than I usually do. Um, well, we'll stick on the subject that you started here.
Well,
Is
we should
how did I
explain
feel?
how the cape works.
Totally. So the cape is an item that you collect. That it uses magic while you're wearing it. And while you're wearing it, Link becomes invisible and invincible. So he takes no damage during this time, and also doesn't get knocked back or anything. So it makes it the perfect tool to fight any boss because you just throw the cape on and swing the sword until you run out of magic, and by then you've killed the boss. Um, but so normally I pick up the cape before going into the third or before finishing the third dungeon in the Dark World. Because around the third and fourth dungeons, you can start taking stuff out of order. Um, and so I usually I get the level 2 power glove in the fourth dungeon, and then go pick up the cape, and then take out dungeons 3 and 4
Mm-hmm.
in that order. Um, and it is usually too easy. So I didn't give myself that favor. But on the subject of the bosses in general, they feel a little damage spongy to me, especially in the early go, where like you figure out how to fight them, and then I can't believe the game makes you keep fighting them that long.
Yeah, I feel like
You know what I mean?
yeah, like they're just not very memorable. I
Hmm.
do think that they got better at bosses like in and I think like opening up the world up to 3D helped a lot. But
Totally.
yeah, the Link to the Past bosses like this time through I was like I would encounter one I was like, "Oh, right, this was a thing." But there was no encounter that I was like looking forward to or like any boss where I was like, yes, this is a cool boss and I'm so glad I get to fight it. They all just felt like a chore to me.
Yeah, which then like in the last dungeon in the Dark World, where they make you fight all three of the bosses from the Light World
Mhm.
dungeons, again, uh every single one of them I was like, ugh, I don't want to fight these again. Especially that like worm thing that
Oh my
like
gosh,
rolls
yeah.
around and it just keeps knocking you off, and you're like, oh, now I gotta climb back up here and fight it again.
Uh,
That's not a good boss. That's a bad boss. I'm gonna come out and say it. That's a bad boss.
was there anything that like surprised you this go round or like anything that was particularly memorable in a way that like really struck you when you played this time?
I don't know. I felt more this time interacting with the people in Hyrule, or the people in Kakariko Village, uh like coming back from the Dark World version of it. Like where you bring the little like frog guy back.
Mhm.
He's a frog in the Dark World, and then becomes the dwarf who like crafts your the level 3 sword for you. um I felt a lot more like connected to those characters, and the sort of like the deformation of characters going into the Dark World felt realer to me this time, and I don't really know why. Um, but I don't know that there were any like gameplay moments. It all felt like story or character things. What about you?
No, I feel the same way, and I think it goes along with just like this time. I really enjoyed the overworld and just living in Hyrule and like exploring Hyrule, and the dungeons and stuff were fine. Sometimes really like annoying to get through, but for me, like a moment that like struck me this time that never really like thought about before was just like Flute Boy where
Oh
like
yeah.
he's looking for his flute, you find his flute, he turns into a tree, and you're just like, oh my heart, for whatever reason, like those little three little dialogue boxes just got me really feeling for Flute Boy.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of good, and again, like to the game's strength, that they're not afraid to use unique visual assets to tell a meaningless one-off story, right? Like, um, you don't need to. It's not. It bears no weight on like the giant mythological implications that there's a boy out in the woods and his father who misses him, right? And that the boy turns into a tree, like turns from a creature that we only see one time in the game into a tree, which we also only see one time in the game. Um, it's that level of like commitment to the storytelling that feels so like special, you
Mhm.
know?
I completely agree. And it's why, like, even though, my mindset is kind of shifted on the game where I wasn't really looking forward to going in and like exploring the dungeons and everything, I still found it such like a rewarding playthrough.
Yeah. Did you use any extra materials to get through this game? Either
Oh,
the
yeah, I
official
did.
Nintendo Power Player's Guide.
I 100% used guides to get through the dungeons because I was just like, nope, I do not like after once I got to the dark world and some of the later dungeons, I was just like,
Mhm.
no, there is no way I'm like just stumbling my way through this. It feels like a waste of time. I'm not having fun. Let me just look up a guide.
Do you remember what guide you used?
I used one from actually, yes, I do. It is Zelda Dungeon, I think. ZeldaDungeon.net.
Ah,
They have
Zelda
they have
Dungeon's a good
walkthroughs.
resource.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, I used nothing. Except I used, of course, the unfair guide that has been seared into my brain over the course of the last 28 years.
Was this a question that was just set up so that way you could say that you didn't use a guide?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of game that I would totally use a guide on. Um, were it not so much a part of who I am.
Mhm.
Uh, if I were playing, one of like the Oracle games, I would absolutely use a guide. Um, but yeah, I just have too much of this dumb game memorized.
I have to tell you, looking forward to the future, that Star Fox I am dreading partly because a guide will not
A
help
guide's
you.
not gonna help you.
Yeah.
No.
I know what I gotta do.
You gotta shoot and do a barrel roll, man. Okay. So, one more thing that I will say about this game that struck me, and I don't know, it's not like unique that it struck me this time, as I am moved by it every time I play this game. But the end of this game, like after you defeat Ganon, because the Ganon fights, whatever. Um, but the sequence after is incredible. Um, the like little dancing Triforce pieces that echoes what you see on the title screen, and then Link actually grabbing them, and then the kingdom returning to normal as you just gradually check in on everyone. And the music is this unique piece of music which we've played on this show many times before.
Mhm.
Anytime that I need to like pull out the stops and be like, here's a piece of music that we don't talk about enough. Um, it's one of those, and that plays through like as you're checking in on the witch and the flute boy and the like the kingdom is at rest, and all that's incredible. And then the game just goes to like the regular old credits, where the pieces of the Triforce are still like kind of spinning around, and we get another unique piece of music, which also slaps. It's so good. The music at like the end of this game, the credit music is perfect. I love it. I know we already crowned the best Nintendo music ever, but I feel like we got to go back.
Well, I'm pretty sure anyways the piece we crowned was the overworld theme from A Link to the Past,
Great point.
which does make sense. Yeah, the music in this game is absolutely iconic. Um yeah, and to your point about like that ending sequence where you're checking in on everybody, it feels, and I'm just like really feeling sentimental right now about like community and connection, but it
Yeah.
felt earned to me. Like that is really the
Hmm.
part of Link to the Past that I loved.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's nice that the game has like a handle on what its emotional beats are. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it knows itself so well. Okay, Mark, here we are, I think probably at the end of our discussion of A Link to the Past. Do you think that this is a game that you can recommend to someone who has grown used to the quality of life improvements we have in games in 2020?
I do. I think Link to the Past is a true classic. Asterisk, use a guide for the dungeons.
I think that's great advice. And specifically, use the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past Nintendo Player's Guide because it's free. And if there's a ton of crazy art in this thing, like it's just wild. But it also offers like two different versions of walkthrough in it. One where like it tells you what's going on. One that like is a little bit more spoilery, and one that kind of like lets you do some discovering on your own. It's cool. It's a really cool guide. And almost more than the game, I recommend everyone check out this guide.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever
rad.
seen it before. I am definitely going to check it out.
I'm sure we had a copy of it because it came with like the subscription in Nintendo Power. It's crazy and makes me wish. Here's a thought that I've had for a couple weeks now is I would love for there to be like a new 8-bit or 16-bit style Zelda-esque game that leaves all of the storytelling to like the print guide, and that like you basically just need the guide to play the game. Like, oh man, I would love that. An interactive literature game experience. Ooh, baby, someone make that, please.
So I think Ni no Kuni, the original Ni no Kuni on DS, had a mechanic very similar that I believe it came with like a very thick like book that was important to the gameplay and like explained like the lore and everything. I'm not even sure it was released in the US, but
yeah, I was gonna say I think that's Japanese only.
Yeah, but I think Ni no Kuni attempted something like you were talking about, just unsuccessfully.
And like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, do you have any final thoughts before we close out our discussion on The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past?
No, I really got to check out that player's guide from Nintendo Power, and we'll be including the link to that in the show notes so everybody can check it out.
I'm going to make a copy of the URL right now. Okay. All right, Mark, let's close out this segment. And that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. How did you enjoy your playthrough of Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past? As I know you have been playing along. I know it. I know you have. It's very easy to do. You should email us and let us know at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. And of course, if you have any observations about the game that we are playing next week, which is Super Metroid, aka Metroid 3, aka maybe the greatest game ever made, you should email us or tweet at us. We would love to have your observations in our conversation next week. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast. You can share us on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you share stuff. On Twitter, you can follow Mark and I or the show. I am at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at NinCart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo, and our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers saying thank you for listening.
That's right, Nintendo Cartridge Society listeners, what is going down?
Are you ready for a promo?
Let's do yoga. Let's get fit.
Hi, I'm Nick.
And I'm Muriel.
And we're the hosts of Hella in Your 30s.
A podcast about a cool couple trying to do adult stuff.
So each week we invite you to join us as we try to learn things we should probably already know, like how does a stock market work? Can we install that bidet? Why are all of our houseplants dying?
This is a podcast for people of all ages because remember,
Age ain't nothing but a number.
but being hella in your 30s is a state of mind.
So tomorrow's a new day, let's order pizza.
Campfire.